Gen Z says it wants to retire at 54. That's according to Empower's research on how Americans plan their financial lives, and it's nearly a decade earlier than the average American's target of 63. Millennials are aiming for 60. Gen X, 66. Boomers, 71. Gen Z is, by a wide margin, the generation planning the earliest exit. Here's the part that doesn't get repeated as often. A year before that, Gen Z told the same researchers they plan to retire at 49. So even Gen Z is walking its own number back, and it's still 5 years ahead of anyone else's plan. This video is about what happens when you actually run the math behind that number, because the honest version is a lot messier than retire at 54. The early retirement math has a name. FIRE. Financial independence. Retire early. It comes down to two numbers. The 25 times rule says you need 25 times your annual spending saved and invested. The 4% rule is the same idea in reverse. Withdraw 4% of your portfolio in year one, adjust for inflation after that, and, per the research behind it, you likely won't run out of money for 30 years. The bigger lever isn't your income, it's your savings rate. Save 20% of what you make, and you're looking at roughly 37 years to reach that number. Save 50%, and it drops to about 17 years. Save 70%, and it's closer to 8.5. The gap between what you earn and what you spend matters more than the size of your paycheck. Start with the target itself, because it doesn't hold still. Northwestern Mutual asks Americans every year what they think they need to retire comfortably. In 2026, the answer was $1.46 million, up more than 15% in a single year, and about $200,000 more than what people said in 2025. The reasons people gave? Inflation that hasn't let up, longer life expectancies, and genuine uncertainty about what Social Security will look like by the time they get there. Almost half of Americans now say it's somewhat, or very likely they'll outlive their own savings. And that target isn't just inflating on its own. The ground underneath it is moving too. The median U.S. home price went from $317,100 in 2020 to $410,700 in 2026. That's a 29.5% jump in 6 years, on what's usually the single biggest line item in anyone's retirement number. Here's the one that catches early retirees specifically, because it only exists in the years before Medicare. The temporary, more generous ACA health insurance subsidies expired at the end of 2025. In 2026, the old subsidy cliff is back. Earn even $1 over 400% of the federal poverty line, and your premium tax credit doesn't shrink. It disappears completely. For a household of two, that threshold is around $81,760. Go over it, and a couple in their late 50s can lose somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000 a year in subsidies they were counting on, sometimes triggered by earning just $100 too much. This lands hardest on exactly the people trying to retire early, because they're covering their own health insurance for years, sometimes over a decade, before Medicare eligibility kicks in at 65. Fidelity now estimates a 65-year-old retiring this year will need $185,500 for healthcare costs in retirement alone, up 7.5% from last year. And that number doesn't even include long-term care. This is the part of the math that has nothing to do with how much you saved. It's called sequence of returns risk. The danger isn't the average return your portfolio earns over 30 years. It's the order those returns show up in. A market downturn early in retirement forces you to sell more shares to cover the same expenses, at exactly the moment those shares are worth the least. Retirement researcher Wade Pfau found that roughly 77% of a portfolio's final outcome can be explained by just the first 10 years of returns. For a traditional retiree, that's already a real risk. For someone retiring in their 30s or 40s, planning on a 40 to 50-year retirement instead of 20, that decade of bad luck is a much bigger bet to lose. Two more things a lot of early retirement math quietly assumes will be there later. First, Social Security. Its trust fund is now projected to run out in 2032, 6 years from now, which triggers an automatic 22% cut to benefits, unless Congress changes something before then. For a couple retiring in 2033, that's about $18,400 less per year than currently promised. Second, the so-called Great Wealth Transfer, boomers passing an estimated $93 trillion plus down to their kids. It sounds like a safety net for younger generations. It mostly isn't one. 60% of millennials are projected to inherit nothing at all, because just 2% of households will receive half of everything that's transferred. So here's the honest complication. Even people who successfully retire early aren't universally happy they did. In T. Rowe Price research, 28% of retirees say they retired too soon, and unretirement is a real growing category. Roughly 1 in 14 retirees over 50 have already gone back to work in the past 6 months, and nearly 1 in 5 Americans over 65 are still working in some form. Almost half of people who unretire say the reason is simple. They needed the money, or the economic outlook looked bad. Not boredom, not missing coworkers. Which means all 4 of those cases aren't just abstract risks. They're the actual reasons people who thought they'd done the math are ending up back at a desk. I'll use myself here because the numbers are more useful than another hypothetical. I started working in 2013, and I've saved roughly half of what I've made along the way. My net worth recently crossed $2.8 million. My household spends about $120,000 a year now, and more than a third of that, $4,500 a month, is just the mortgage. Run the 4% rule on that $120,000 in spending, and the math says I'm about a year away from that number on paper. But a chunk of that net worth is business equity, not liquid savings. So realistically, it's at least 3 more years before I'm actually waiting on an exit to turn that into spendable money. And even once that happens, I'll probably keep working another 5 years after that, because I genuinely have good work-life balance right now. I work from home, and I like what I do. There's no reason to walk away from good income just to hit an arbitrary early date. That's the real shift underneath strategies like Coast Fire and Barista Fire. Coast Fire means you've already saved enough that compounding alone gets you to your number by a normal retirement age, so you stop stressing about saving more. Barista Fire means working part-time, often specifically for the health benefits, while savings cover the rest. Neither one is really about quitting as early as mathematically possible. They're about turning work from a requirement back into a choice. The most useful number in this video probably isn't 54 or $1.46 million or 77%. It's this. The goal was never really the earliest possible exit. Every case here, the moving target, the healthcare cliff, the first decade risk, the thinner safety nets, is a reason that a hard deadline is fragile. Optionality isn't. Retirement age and fire data in this video come from Empower, Northwestern Mutual, Fidelity, the Social Security Trustees 2026 report, T. Rowe Price, and Wade Pfau's retirement research. Full sources and exact numbers are linked in the description if you want to check the math yourself. If you want more of these, the moments where a clean headline turns into a much harder number once you actually run it, subscribe. New breakdown every few days, always built on real, checkable numbers.